She came for a job. She found a family falling apart. When Hazel Carter stepped off the stage in Cimarron, New Mexico, she carried $32, a letter promising steady work, and the quiet desperation of a woman with nowhere left to go. What she found instead was a house that smelled like grief, 5 children who hadn't eaten a real meal in weeks, and a man so buried in his own pain he'd forgotten he was still alive. She should have turned around. Any sensible woman would have. But then a little girl with matted hair and frightened eyes reached up and took her hand. And Hazel Carter made the worst, best decision of her life. If this is your first time finding our channel, welcome. Pull up a chair, because this one's going to take a while. If this story moves you, hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The stage road into Cimarron cut through red dust and scrub juniper, and by the time the coach rattled to a stop in front of the post office, Hazel's back ached from the wooden bench, and her dress was the color of the road. She climbed down without waiting for help. She'd stopped waiting for help about 8 months ago, when the doctor told her both her parents were gone inside the same bitter winter, and dragged her bag off the luggage rack herself. She stood in the street and looked around at the town. It wasn't much. A general store, a livery, 2 saloons already loud at 2 in the afternoon, a church with a cracked bell. The kind of town that didn't apologize for what it was. She pulled the letter from her coat pocket and read it again, though she practically had it memorized. Mrs. Hazel Carter. I am in need of a reliable housekeeper for my household of 5 children. The position offers room, board, and $14 per month. The house is orderly and the children are well managed. I require someone of steady disposition. If you are interested, please present yourself at Mercer Ranch, 7 miles east of Cimarron. Cole Mercer. Orderly household. Well-managed children. She folded the letter back into her pocket and hired a man with a wagon to take her the 7 miles east. The ranch came into view slowly. First the fence line running crooked along the road, then a barn that needed paint 3 years ago. Then the house itself, a 2-story structure that must have been solid once and was now simply tired. A window on the 2nd floor had a burlap sack stuffed into it where the glass had broken. The front porch sagged on one side. A child's boot sat abandoned in the dirt near the steps. One boot, no mate visible anywhere. Hazel paid the wagon driver and stood at the gate. From inside the house came the sound of a baby crying. Not the fresh, sudden cry of a startled infant. The grinding, exhausted cry of a baby who'd been at it so long it was more habit than protest. She walked up to the front door and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. The crying upstairs continued. Somewhere inside she heard a child's voice snap at another child. A door slammed. She tried the handle. The door swung open. The smell hit her first. Unwashed laundry, old grease, something spoiled she couldn't immediately locate. The front room was dim, the curtains drawn against the afternoon light, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. When they did, she saw the wreckage of ordinary life. Dishes on the floor, a coat thrown over a chair that had become a permanent arrangement, dried mud tracked across the boards, a pile of something in the corner she chose not to examine too closely. A girl stood in the doorway to the kitchen, maybe 12 years old, with her hair pulled back in a way that was practical rather than neat. She was holding a pot with a rag, and she stared at Hazel with the flat measuring eyes of someone who'd seen strangers come and go. "You the new housekeeper?" the girl said. "I believe so," Hazel said. "I'm Hazel Carter. Is your father home?" The girl looked at her a moment longer. "He's out by the creek. He goes out there in the afternoons." She said it without expression, which somehow made it worse. "And the baby? Upstairs?" "That's Samuel. He's been crying since noon." The girl turned back to the kitchen. "He does that." Hazel set her bag down inside the door. "What's your name?" "Ruth." "Ruth, is there someone watching Samuel?" "He's in his crib. He's not going to fall out." Hazel left her bag where it was and went up the stairs. The upstairs hallway was dark, and she had to step over a pile of folded, or rather unfolded, laundry to reach the door at the end. The room beyond was small and close, a window on the south wall letting in a thread of light around the edges of a curtain. The crib was in the corner. The baby inside it was maybe 7 months old. He'd kicked off his blanket and his face was red and wet and furious. He stopped crying the instant she picked him up, which told her everything she needed to know about how often someone had done exactly that today. She held him against her shoulder and felt him shudder through the aftershocks of crying, those small, hitching breaths that come after a long bout of it. He was warm and real and smelled like he needed changing about 2 hours ago. "All right," she said quietly to him. "All right." She found what she needed on a shelf, not organized but present, and tended to him. By the time she carried him back downstairs, he was almost calm. Ruth was still in the kitchen, stirring something over the stove that smelled like it had been the same pot of beans for several days. "How long has Samuel been up there alone?" Ruth stirred without looking up. "I was going to go up when I finished this." "That's not what I asked." Ruth's jaw tightened. "Since noon, I said that already." Hazel looked at the girl, really looked at her. The shadows under her eyes, the way her shoulders had that particular set of someone carrying more weight than they should. 12 years old and running this kitchen, managing this house, listening to her baby brother cry while she stirred beans on a stove. Hazel did not say what she was thinking. Instead, she said, "Where do you keep the clean cloths for the baby?" "Basket in the pantry. There aren't many left." She wasn't wrong. There were 4. "We'll need to wash some today," Hazel said. Ruth glanced over at her then, quick and assessing. "You're staying?" It wasn't hope exactly in her voice. It was something more guarded than hope, like someone who'd been promised things before and learned to hold offers at arm's length until they proved themselves. "I haven't met your father yet," Hazel said. "But yes, I expect I'm staying." She found Cole Mercer at the creek, like Ruth said. He was sitting on a flat rock at the water's edge, not fishing, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. He was a large man gone somewhat thin. She could see it in his neck, the way his collar sat loose, the way his coat hung. He had dark hair that needed cutting and 3 or 4 days of beard, and the look of someone who slept badly, if at all. He heard her coming and turned. For a moment he just looked at her. Then he looked at the baby on her shoulder. "You got Samuel," he said. "He was crying." Cole stood up from the rock. Ruth was making supper. Hazel kept her voice level. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Hazel Carter. I came about the housekeeper position." Something shifted in his face. It might have been relief. "Yes, I got your letter. I'm glad you came." "Are you?" She looked at him steadily. "Your letter said the household was orderly and the children were well managed." He held her gaze for 1 second before he looked away. "I may have—" He stopped. Started again. "I needed someone to come." 3 someones have come, she said, and left, from what I can tell, given the state of things. What happened to them? He was quiet. "Mr. Mercer." "The first one stayed 2 weeks, he said. She said it was too much. The second, she didn't last a week. She said she hadn't signed on to raise another woman's children." He paused. "The third one left in the night. Didn't say anything, just wasn't there in the morning." Hazel shifted Samuel to her other shoulder. He'd gotten heavy. "So you lied in the letter because you were afraid I'd refuse to come." He didn't deny it. "I needed—" He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know what I need. I just know this isn't working." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back, and there was no attempt to charm her or talk her out of what she'd seen. He just looked like a man who was drowning slowly and had stopped pretending otherwise. "When did your wife die?" she asked. 7 months ago." His voice didn't crack. It didn't have to. The flatness in it said everything. Childbirth, Samuel. He glanced at the baby, and the look on his face was complicated in a way she wasn't going to untangle in a single afternoon. Hazel looked back toward the house. From here she could see the back of it, the stack of firewood that hadn't been split properly, the garden plot gone completely to weeds, a shirt hanging on the fence line that had clearly been there for days. She thought about her $32, about the stage road back to Santa Fe and the nothing that waited for her there, about the letter in her pocket and the lie it had told her. She opened her mouth to tell him she wouldn't be staying, and then a small sound behind her made her turn. A girl had followed her from the house, younger than Ruth, maybe 6 or 7, with a smear of something on her chin and bare feet despite the cool afternoon. She was standing about 10 feet back, half hidden behind a juniper, watching Hazel with enormous dark eyes. Hazel looked at her. The girl took one step forward, then another. Then she crossed the remaining distance at a run and grabbed Hazel's free hand with both of hers and held on. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Hazel felt something in her chest do something she couldn't name. "What's your name?" she said softly. "Emma," the girl whispered. Hazel stood there for a moment with a baby on one shoulder and a small girl gripping her hand and a man watching her from 12 feet away with the look of someone who'd given up, expecting anything good. She looked down at Emma. Emma looked up at her. "All right, Hazel said. Not to Cole. Not to anyone in particular, just to the fact of it." She turned back toward the house. "Mr. Mercer, I'll need a list of what supplies you have and what you don't. I'll need laundry water heated by morning and wood split by tonight if there isn't enough already. I'll need to know which children are in school and which aren't, and why not." She was already walking. Emma trotted alongside her, still holding her hand. Cole Mercer stood by his creek for a moment. Then he followed. That first evening was not graceful. Supper was the beans Ruth had been minding, which Hazel saved from going to mush by adding what she found in the back of the pantry: a half onion, some dried pepper, a piece of salt pork she cut the bad edge off of. She found cornmeal and made a pan of cornbread that came out a little flat because the leavening was old, but it was hot, and it was food. She met the rest of the children over that table. James was 14 and he came in late and sat down without looking at her. He had the same dark hair as his father and the same set to his jaw, but where Cole's expression was empty, James's was defended. The face of someone who'd decided ahead of time that new wasn't going to be better. Nell was 9. She was quiet in a way that felt like it had become a habit, and she sat through supper with a small folded paper in her hand that she kept smoothing and refolding. She answered when spoken to. She didn't volunteer anything. And Ruth, serving from the pot with the confidence of someone who'd been doing it for months, who sat down last and ate fast, already calculating what needed doing next. 5 children, a baby with no mother, a father who went to sit by a creek in the afternoons, and a woman who'd come for a job and gotten something considerably more complicated. After supper, when the younger ones had been sent to wash up, a process Hazel supervised because left alone they would have called a quick splash of cold water sufficient, she stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the darkening yard. Cole came in from outside where he'd split enough wood for the morning. He set it beside the stove without being asked, which she noted. "The 2 youngest aren't in school," he said. "I noticed. Nell stopped going about, 3 months ago. Emma never started. She was supposed to start this fall, but He stopped. "It didn't happen." "It'll happen Monday," Hazel said. He looked at her. She looked back. "Monday," she repeated, not as a question. He nodded once. Then he said, "I know the letter wasn't... I know you came here under false pretenses, and I'm sorry for that. I'll understand if you want to. I said I'm staying, Mr. Mercer." He was quiet for a moment. "Why?" She thought about it. She thought about the honest answer, which was that Emma had grabbed her hand and she hadn't been able to make herself pull it away. That felt too simple and also too true. "Because someone needs to," she said finally, "and I'm here." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough of it. Cole Mercer stood in his kitchen doorway and looked at the woman who had walked into his disaster of a house and fed his children hot food and put his baby to sleep and announced that school would be on Monday, like it was simply a fact of the world waiting to be acknowledged. He didn't say thank you. She didn't need him to. "There's a room at the top of the stairs," he said. "Second door on the right. It's not much." "It'll do," she said. She dried her hands on the dishcloth and turned to deal with the stack of laundry she'd sorted in the corner. Outside the kitchen window, the New Mexico night was coming on fast, cold, and full of stars, and somewhere out on the Mercer Ranch, a coyote called once and went quiet. Inside the kitchen, Hazel Carter began making a mental list of everything that needed to happen tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. She had work to do. The first week was the hardest. Not because of the work. Hazel had worked hard her whole life and wasn't frightened of it. It was the resistance she hadn't fully accounted for. She'd expected mess and disorganization. She hadn't expected 5 separate people all grieving in 5 completely different directions, none of them talking to each other about it, all of them in the same house. She started with the practical things because the practical things were what she could actually touch. Monday morning, she got Nell and Emma up before the others, washed their faces, braided their hair. Emma's badly, because Emma wouldn't hold still, and Nell submitted to it with the patience of someone tolerating a procedure, and put food on the table before Cole came down. She'd been up since 5:30, same as Ruth, who appeared in the kitchen doorway already dressed with the quiet inevitability of someone who'd forgotten what sleeping late felt like. "I can do the breakfast," Ruth said. "I've got it," Hazel said. "Sit down." Ruth stood there another moment, as if the instruction didn't quite compute. Then she pulled out a chair and sat, and the look on her face when she realized she had nothing to do with her hands was something between relief and discomfort. Cole came down, saw the table set, said nothing. He poured his own coffee and sat at the head of the table and looked at his plate. James came down last, already wearing his hat inside, which seemed to be a statement of some kind. "Hat off at the table," Hazel said, not looking up from the stove. Silence. "James," Cole said quietly. The hat came off. It landed on the floor beside his chair, which was not the same as hanging it by the door, but Hazel decided to take the partial victory. She got Nell and Emma to school that morning, walking them the 1.5 miles into town herself, because she wanted to see where the schoolhouse was, and who the teacher was, and what the situation looked like. The teacher was a young woman named Miss Aldred, who looked briefly alarmed when Hazel appeared in the doorway with 2 Mercer girls, then composed herself and welcomed them in. Nell walked to a desk without being told, and sat down with the focused blankness of someone retreating into a familiar place. Emma stood in the doorway and gripped Hazel's hand and would not let go. "I'll be back at 3 o'clock, Hazel told her. "You'll be here. I'll be here. That's how it works." Emma's eyes were enormous. "What if you're not?" "I will be." "But what if—" "Emma," Hazel crouched down to her level. "I was there this morning when you woke up. I'll be there when you come home. That's what I'm telling you." Emma looked at her for a long moment, weighing something Hazel couldn't quite name. Then she let go and walked to the desk Miss Aldred pointed her toward, and she didn't look back, which Hazel understood was its own kind of bravery. The walk back to the ranch was quiet and gave Hazel time to think about what she'd taken on. The house yielded its problems one at a time, the way a bad winter does. Just when you thought you'd handled one thing, another came loose. The window upstairs with the burlap in it turned out to have a cracked frame, not just broken glass. The pantry had a mouse problem that had been going on long enough to become structural. The well pump needed a new leather washer. The garden was finished for the season, but the beds hadn't been turned, which meant spring would be harder than it needed to be. She wrote a list, then a longer list. Then she set the longer list aside and made a shorter list of what had to happen this week, because the longer list would only make her tired before she started. Cole watched her do this from across the kitchen table on Tuesday evening. "You're making lists," he said. "Yes." "Catherine used to do that." He said it without apparent intent to wound, which almost made it worse. Hazel looked up. "I'll need some money for supplies, not a lot. Enough. I can go into town." "I'll go," she said. "I know what I'm looking for." He didn't argue. He went to the tin on the shelf and counted out $7 without comment and set it on the table. She took it, counted it herself out of habit, and wrote down what she intended to spend it on. Cole watched her. "You don't trust me." "I don't know you," she said. "There's a difference." He seemed to think about that. "Fair enough," he said. It was the most honest exchange they'd had. What she hadn't anticipated, couldn't have anticipated from the letter, was James. Ruth was exhausted and defensive, but fundamentally capable. Nell was withdrawn in a way that felt like self-protection, manageable. Emma was simply afraid of being abandoned, which was straightforward enough grief. Samuel was an infant who needed what infants needed. James was something else. He was 14, which was already a difficult age for a boy under ordinary circumstances. And these were not ordinary circumstances. He'd watched his mother die. Not literally, but effectively, in the way that a person can be present in a house when something terrible happens and be marked by the proximity of it. He'd watched his father go quiet and absent. He'd watched Ruth take over and then 3 housekeepers come and fail. He'd developed in the months since A particular kind of contempt that wasn't loud or dramatic but was constant, the way a low-grade fever is constant. He did his chores. That was the thing. He did what was asked of him mostly, and in a way that was technically correct and emotionally empty. He fed the horses and split wood when Cole asked, and carried water. He just did all of it with the energy of someone performing a sentence. On Wednesday, Hazel sent him to the barn to muck out 2 stalls that had been neglected for longer than they should have been. He came back an hour later saying he'd done it. She went and looked. He'd done half of one. She came back to the house. James was sitting on the porch. "You didn't finish," she said. "I did what needed doing." "Half a job is not a finished job." He looked out at the yard. "I've got other things." "Name one." He didn't answer. "James." She sat down on the step below him, which put her lower than him, and she did it deliberately. "I'm not your enemy. I didn't say you were." "You act like it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "The last woman who came here told Nell that she needed to stop drawing pictures and do something useful." He said it flat, like a report. "Nell put her drawings away after that. Hasn't taken them out since." Hazel filed that away. "I'm not her. You're all the same." "We're not, actually," Hazel said. "People generally aren't." She stood up. "Finish the stalls, all of them. When you're done, come find me and I'll have something to eat ready." She went inside. He sat on the porch for another 10 minutes. She could hear him not moving. Then she heard him get up and go to the barn. She didn't make a point of it when he came in for supper. She just put a plate in front of him that had a little more on it than everyone else's, and he noticed, and he didn't say anything, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. It was Ruth who told her about the drawings. Thursday evening, after the little ones were in bed and Cole had gone out to check the stock, Ruth stayed in the kitchen and dried dishes while Hazel washed, and they fell into the kind of conversation that happens in kitchens when it's late and the work is almost done. "Nell used to draw everything," Ruth said. "She'd sit on the porch and draw the mountains. She'd draw the horses. She drew Mama." She stopped, then continued. "She drew Mama all the time." Hazel kept washing. "What did she do with the drawings?" "Kept them in a box under her bed." Ruth set down a dried pan. After Mrs. Loring, that was the second woman who came. After she said what she said, Nell put the box in the back of the closet. "I don't think she's opened it since." "Does she know you know where it is?" Ruth shook her head. "She thinks she's hiding it." Hazel washed the last cup and set it in the rack. "What was your mother like?" Ruth was quiet for long enough that Hazel thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she said, "She was loud, not in a bad way, just she took up a lot of space. When she came into a room, you knew it." She picked up another dish. "Papa was the quiet one. She was the one who laughed." Hazel dried her hands. Outside, she could hear Cole's boots on the porch boards. "You don't have to be her, you know," Hazel said. "Your mother." Ruth's hands stilled on the dish. "You've been running this house for 7 months," Hazel said. "That's not what 12-year-old girls are supposed to do." "Someone had to." "Yes, and that someone can stand down now." Ruth set the dish down carefully on the stack. Her face was controlled in the way of someone who'd been controlling it for a very long time. "What am I supposed to do instead?" "Whatever you actually want," Hazel said. "What did you do before?" Ruth thought about it. "I read. Papa used to get books from town." "Then read." "There's too much to—" "Ruth." Hazel waited until the girl looked at her. "Go read a book. Right now. I'll finish up here." Ruth stood there in the kitchen looking uncertain in a way she almost never allowed herself to look. Then she took off her apron, folded it over the chair, and went upstairs. And Hazel heard, after a few minutes, the sound of a drawer opening, and then quiet. Cole came in from outside and stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the empty room. "Where's Ruth?" "Upstairs," Hazel said. "Reading." He looked at her. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite identify. Not quite relief. Something older than relief, and harder. "She hasn't done that in a while," he said. "I know." He hung his coat. He poured himself the last of the coffee and stood at the stove drinking it. The kitchen was quiet. "I'm not doing well by them," he said. Not to her exactly. More like a statement that had been waiting to be said out loud and had found a convenient moment. Hazel wrung out the dishcloth and hung it. No, she agreed. He looked up. But you could, she said. That's the part you seem to have forgotten. He didn't answer. She didn't push it. Some things needed to land before you could do anything with them. Fine. The first real break came on Friday. She was in the garden turning the beds, which was hard work in the dry clay soil, when she heard the sound of hooves and looked up to see a man riding in through the front gate. Not Cole. Cole was with James, doing something with the fencing on the south pasture. This man was heavier, better dressed, riding a good horse, and he pulled up near the garden and looked down at her with the particular expression of someone who doesn't expect to be working for attention. "Who are you?" he said. Hazel set the spade in the ground and straightened up. "I work here. Who are you?" The man looked briefly annoyed at being answered with a question. "Aldous Brigg," he said. "I have business with Mercer." She'd heard the name twice in her first week, once from Cole, briefly, and once from the man at the general store who'd helped her load supplies. Both times the mention of it had produced a certain tightening. She noted that now. "He's on the south pasture," she said. "I can tell him you came by." "I'll find him myself." Brigg turned his horse toward the pasture road without waiting. She watched him go. That evening she asked Cole about it. "He came by," Cole said. He was at the kitchen table and something had changed in the set of his shoulders since the afternoon. He wanted to talk about the water. "What about it?" Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "There's a creek that runs through the east corner of the property. It's been there since before I built this place. It feeds 3 other ranches after it crosses my land." He set the cup down. "Brigg's been saying the water rights in this county need to be clarified, saying he has a prior claim." "Does he?" "No." The word came out flat and certain. "He doesn't. But he's got money, and he's got a lawyer, and he put a diversion ditch in upstream 2 months ago. It's reduced the flow coming through here by about 1/3. Hazel looked at him. "That's illegal." "Yes." "What have you done about it?" The silence that followed was not a comfortable one. "Cole," she said. "I wrote a letter to the county land office," he said. "When?" 6 weeks ago." "And?" "I haven't heard back." She looked at him across the table. He looked back, and he had the decency to look somewhat ashamed, which told her he knew as well as she did that this wasn't enough. "You have 5 children and a ranch and someone stealing your water," she said. 6 weeks ago you wrote a letter." "I wasn't exactly—" He stopped, started again. "I wasn't in a position to deal with it the way I should have." She understood what he wasn't saying. He'd been sitting by his creek in the afternoons and letting everything else go because grief had emptied him out in a way that made everything beyond the immediate feel unreachable. She understood it. She'd watched her father do it after her mother got sick the first time, that slow withdrawal from the practical world. She also understood that understanding it didn't make it not a problem. "What do the other ranches say?" she said. "The ones downstream of you." "Hendricks is mad as hell. Paulson thinks he can work something out with Brigg directly, which is—" He shook his head. "Brigg doesn't work things out. He buys things or he takes them." "Then you need to get in front of this," Hazel said. "Not a letter. You need to go see the county recorder yourself and you need to bring Hendricks with you." "I've got too much—" "The fencing can wait," she said. "The water can't." He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. It wasn't irritation exactly. It was more like someone being told a thing they already knew by a person they hadn't yet decided they wanted to hear it from. "You've been here a week," he said. "Yes," Hazel said, "and I can see this from a week away, which should tell you something about how long it's been visible." He didn't answer that. She got up and started clearing the table, and after a moment she heard him exhale, long and slow, the breath of someone letting go of an argument they weren't sure they'd wanted to win anyway. Saturday brought a different problem. Hazel was hanging laundry in the side yard, actual clean laundry, the first full wash she'd managed to get through in one day, when she heard raised voices from inside the house. She came in through the back door to find James in the kitchen, face red, and Ruth standing opposite him with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who'd been having this argument for months. "It's not your decision," James was saying. "I didn't say it was. I said Papa already. Papa doesn't know what he's doing half the time." "James, it's true, and you know it." "Stop," Hazel said. They both went quiet and turned to look at her. "What happened?" she said. James's jaw worked. "Mr. Hendricks came by. He wants Papa to come to a meeting on Tuesday, in town, about the water situation, and Papa said he couldn't make it because of the south fence." Hazel looked at Ruth. Ruth confirmed this with a small nod. "A meeting of who?" Hazel said. "All the ranchers Briggs been messing with," James said. He had a piece of paper in his hand that he was crushing. "Apparently there's 5 of us, and we could all go to the county together, and it would carry more weight than just one letter. But Papa—" "I'll talk to your father," Hazel said. James stared at her. "He doesn't listen." "Maybe not, but I'll still talk to him." She found Cole in the barn. He was doing something with a saddle, or rather he was holding a saddle and standing still, which wasn't quite the same thing. She told him about the meeting. He didn't look up. "The south fence has to be done before the cattle push." "James can finish the south fence. James is 14. James is large and capable and has been doing ranch work since he was old enough to hold a post driver," Hazel said. "He can finish the fence. You need to be at that meeting." Cole set the saddle down on the rack. He turned around. "You've been here 8 days. You keep saying that like it means I'm wrong." He looked at her for a long moment. "She was the one who handled things like this," he said. "Catherine. She'd know who to talk to and how to talk to them. She understood those things." He paused. "I was better at the land." Hazel didn't let herself be softened by the honesty of it. "Or not very much. Then learn," she said. "You don't have a choice. You have 5 children who need this ranch to survive." Cole looked at his hands. They were the hands of a man who'd worked hard for many years, scarred and calloused, and they were holding nothing right now. "I'll go to the meeting," he said quietly. "Good," Hazel said. She turned to go. "Hazel." She stopped. It was the first time he'd used her name. "Thank you," he said. "For staying." She turned enough to look at him over her shoulder. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "We've still got a lot of ground to cover." She went back to the house. Behind her, she heard Cole pick up the saddle and start actually working on it. That evening, after supper, something unexpected happened. Nell appeared in the kitchen doorway carrying a small folded piece of paper. She stood there until Hazel noticed her, and then she held it out. Hazel took it and unfolded it. It was a drawing, done in pencil, careful and exact. The mountains to the north of the ranch, the way they looked in the early morning when the light was still low. The proportions were slightly off in the way of a child teaching herself, but the line of the ridge was true, and there was something in the quality of the marks, the patience of them, that made the picture feel more alive than technically correct drawings often did. "This is good," Hazel said. Nell was watching her. "Really? Really?" Hazel looked at it again. "You've got the light right. That's the hard part." Nell's face did something complicated, not quite smiling, getting close to it. "Mrs. Loring said drawing pictures was wasted time for a girl my age," she said. "Mrs. Loring," Hazel said, "was wrong." She folded the drawing carefully and handed it back. "I'd like to see the others sometime," Hazel said. "If you want to show me." Nell took the drawing back and held it against her chest. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either, and Hazel understood that in the Mercer house, not no was often its own kind of yes. That night, after the house had gone quiet, and Samuel had finally settled and she could hear nothing but the wind off the hills, Hazel sat on the edge of her bed and thought about what she'd walked into. She'd come for a job. She'd come for $14 a month and a room and the breathing room to figure out what came next. Instead, she'd found Ruth, who'd forgotten how to be a child, and James, who'd built walls she was going to have to take apart one brick at a time, and Nell with her drawings hidden in a closet. And Emma, who ran to hold her hand like holding on was the only thing she knew to do, and Samuel, who cried because nobody came, and Cole, who sat by a creek in the afternoons because it was easier than the house. She was not the woman for this. She had no training for it. She was 31 years old, and she'd managed a household, and she could cook, and she was practical, and she didn't give up easily, but none of that was the same as knowing what to do with a family that had broken apart at its center and was still trying to hold its shape out of habit. But she was here. And the alternative, leaving, was something she'd considered in that first hour and couldn't seem to make herself circle back to. She lay back on the svet and listened to the wind. The ranch creaked around her, that particular sound of old wood settling in the cold, and somewhere down the hall she heard Emma turn over in her sleep and say something indistinct, and then go quiet. Hazel stared at the ceiling. All right, she thought, all right. She closed her eyes. Cole went to the Tuesday meeting. Hazel knew because she watched him ride out at 8 in the morning on a horse that had been brushed down properly for the first time in what looked like months, wearing a clean shirt she'd pressed herself the night before without asking whether he wanted her to. He didn't say goodbye when he left, just touched the brim of his hat in her direction from the saddle, but she noticed he sat straighter than he usually did, and that was something. James spent the morning on the south fence and didn't complain about it once, which Hazel suspected cost him more than she was going to acknowledge out loud. She was in the kitchen making bread, real bread, not the flat cornbread of her first week, but an actual loaf she'd been planning since she got the pantry organized. When Emma came in from school early, not just early. Emma came in at 11 in the morning, which was not early by any stretch. She was supposed to be there until 3. And she was wearing the expression of a child who had decided in advance that whatever she'd done was not her fault. Hazel looked at her. Emma looked at the floor. Miss Aldred sent you home? Hazel said. A pause. She sent a note. Hazel wiped her hands and took the folded paper Emma produced from her coat pocket. She read it. She read it again. You hit a boy, Hazel said. He said something. What did he say? Emma's jaw set in a way that was so similar to James, it was almost startling. He said we didn't have a mother because our mother didn't want to be one. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Hazel refolded the note carefully. She put it on the table. She looked at Emma, who was still looking at the floor with the defiant posture of someone waiting to be punished. Did you hurt him? Hazel said. Emma looked up. Clearly that wasn't the response she'd expected. His nose bled a little. A little. Not a lot. Hazel looked at her for a long moment. She thought about what the right thing to say was. The correct response, the responsible response, was to explain that hitting was wrong and that Emma needed to go back and apologize and face whatever consequence Miss Aldred had decided on. All of that was true. It was also true that a 7-year-old had just defended her dead mother's honor with her fists. You still can't hit people, Hazel said, even when they deserve it. He deserved it. I'm not arguing that part, but you can't go around solving things with your hands. You understand me? Emma's chin was still set. Yes, ma'am. You're going to go back Monday and apologize to Miss Aldred, not to the boy. Miss Aldred, because she's the one running the classroom and you disrupted it. Can you do that? Emma thought about it with the serious consideration of someone negotiating terms. Do I have to say sorry to him? No, you have to stay away from him. That's different. Something in Emma's shoulders came down about an inch. All right. Hazel turned back to the bread dough. Sit down and I'll find you something to do. Emma sat. Then, quietly, she said, Our mother did want to be one. Hazel didn't look up from the dough. I know she did. How do you know? You didn't know her. Because of the 5 of you, Hazel said. People who don't want to be mothers don't raise children like the ones in this house. Silence. Then the sound of Emma pulling a chair in and putting her elbows on the table, which was normally not allowed, but Hazel let it go. Do you think she can see us? Emma asked. Hazel was quiet for a moment. I don't know, she said honestly. I think she would have wanted to. That's what I know. Emma seemed to accept that. She sat there in the kitchen while Hazel worked the bread, and she didn't say anything else, and somehow the silence between them was easier than it had been. Mamas. Cole came back from town in the late afternoon with a different energy than he'd left with. Not fixed. Nothing was fixed, but less closed off. He came in through the back door and stood in the kitchen and reported to her like she'd asked him to, which she hadn't, but which felt natural apparently. 5 ranchers came, he said. Hendricks, Paulson, the Greer brothers, and me. We talked to the county recorder together. He can't reverse Briggs' diversion permit on his own. That has to go through the land court. But he agreed that the original survey marks on my property are clear and that Briggs' claim of prior use doesn't hold water. He paused at the phrase, seemed to realize what he'd said, almost smiled, but didn't quite. He's going to write an official assessment. Hendricks knows a land attorney in Santa Fe. Good, Hazel said. It's not settled, Cole said. It could take months. Most things do. He looked at her for a moment. There was something he was working up to. She could see it in the way he was standing, the slight forward lean that meant he had more to say. Hendricks asked about you, he said. Said he heard a new woman came to the Mercer place and got the house running again. Word travels fast in small places. He said, Cole stopped. He said people in town were talking about whether the children should be. There was a woman at the meeting, Mabel Crane. She's on the county welfare board. She said the Mercer children had been without proper supervision for going on 7 months, and that someone needed to look into it. Hazel set down what she was holding. She didn't say it to me, Cole said. She said it to Hendricks. He told me afterward. What does that mean exactly? For you and the children? It means someone could petition the court to have the children assessed, to see if the household is, to see if they're being properly cared for. Hazel looked at him. And are they? They are now, he said it quietly. 8 days ago, I couldn't have said that. Then we make sure anyone who comes here can see that. How? By continuing to do what we've been doing, Hazel said. Children in school, meals on the table, house in order. You present in the evenings. She paused. Are you present in the evenings? He had the decency to consider the question honestly before answering. More than I was. Be more than that, she said. He nodded once. He went upstairs to change his shirt, and she heard him stop at the room where Nell and Emma slept, and she heard his voice, low, and Emma's voice answering, and she went back to the stove. See, the threat from the welfare board clarified something in Cole that a week of Hazel's practical interventions hadn't quite reached. It was one thing to be told you needed to do better. It was a different thing to understand that the alternative to doing better was losing your children. She saw the change in him starting the next morning. He was up earlier than usual, and he made coffee, and he was there at the table when the children came down, which had not been a consistent feature of mornings before. It was awkward. She could see that. The children weren't sure what to make of it. James looked at his father's presence at the breakfast table with the specific skepticism of someone who's been let down often enough to protect himself from hope. But Cole stayed. He asked Ruth about her school lessons. He asked James about the fence. He picked up Samuel from the cradle near the stove and held him in the uncertain way of a man who'd been distant from an infant long enough that the mechanics of it felt strange again. Samuel grabbed Cole's collar and pulled. Cole looked down at his son with an expression that Hazel caught only by accident, in the second before he composed himself. It was not grief exactly. It was grief turned toward something, trying to become something other than what it had been. She looked away. After breakfast, James lingered while Ruth and Nell got ready for school. He stood by the stove with his arms crossed and waited until Cole looked at him. The south fence needs 2 more days, James said. Maybe 3. I can help on Saturday, Cole said. James looked at him. The look was measuring, suspicious, not closed. All right, he said finally. Just that. He left for school. Cole stood in the kitchen looking at the space his son had occupied, and Hazel watched him absorb whatever that exchange had cost him and whatever it had given back. He's been trying to reach you for months, she said, not unkindly. He just does it through problems. Cole looked at her. What do you mean? The fence? The water meeting? He brings you problems because he wants to be near you, and he doesn't know how to say that. She shrugged. He's 14 and he's lost his mother. He's not going to say, I miss you, Papa, but he'll tell you the fence needs 2 more days and hope you show up. Cole was quiet for a long time. How do you see things like that? He said. I've had a lot of practice watching people, she said, and you've had a lot of practice not. She said it without meanness, and he took it without defensiveness, which she thought might be the first real moment of genuine ease between them. The trouble with Aldous Brigg did not stay in the background. 10 days after the county meeting, 2 men she didn't recognize rode up the front road at 7 in the evening when supper was done and Cole was still at the table with James going over some paper about the south pasture boundary. She heard the horses first and went to the window. They weren't the kind of men who rode out in the evening on friendly business. She could tell that from the way they sat their horses. Not threatening exactly, but the particular posture of men accustomed to being threatening as a default. "Cole," she said. He was already getting up. "Stay inside," he said to James. "I'm coming." "James." The word was quiet, but had an edge to it that James responded to. He sat back down. Hazel stood at the window and watched Cole walk out to the yard. The two men stayed on their horses, which was itself a kind of statement. She couldn't hear what was being said. She could see the body language. Cole with his thumbs hooked in his belt, not aggressive, but not giving ground. The two men above him using the height of the horses in a way that was calculated. One of them did most of the talking. Cole listened. Then he said something short. Then the talking man said something longer, and she watched Cole's head go still in the particular way that meant he was holding himself very carefully. She took stock of this kitchen. Ruth was upstairs with Emma. Nell was in the front room. She opened the back door quietly and went around the side of the house. She came around the corner at the edge of the yard, close enough to hear. "Brig's a patient man," the talking one was saying, "but his patience has a shape to it, and the shape ends at the county line, you understand?" "I understand that he built an illegal ditch on land that affects 5 ranches," Cole said. "Brig would call that a different thing." "I imagine he would." "Mr. Mercer." The man shifted in his saddle. "We're here as a courtesy. Mr. Brig would prefer to resolve this without involving the court." "What does resolving it look like?" "It looks like you and the other families withdrawing your assessment request. It looks like an agreement on shared water access that benefits everyone." "Shared access that he controls," Cole said. "No." The man looked down at him for a moment. "You've got a family here." It wasn't a threat in the direct sense. It was the kind of thing that sounds like an observation. "Yes," Cole said. "I do." That was when Hazel stepped out from the edge of the house. Both men looked at her. Cole turned his head briefly. She stood there in the yard in her work dress with her arms at her sides, and she looked at the two men on their horses with the particular expression of someone who is not afraid and is not pretending not to be afraid, which is a different expression entirely. "It's late," she said. "And you've said what you came to say." The talking man looked at her. "Ma'am, this is a business matter." "The business is done," she said. "You've delivered your message. Mr. Mercer has heard it. A beat." The two men looked at each other. The second one, who hadn't spoken, almost smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Ma'am," the first one said again, with a different inflection. "Good evening," Hazel said. Another beat. Then the first man gathered his reins. "Mr. Mercer," he said, and touched his hat. They turned their horses and rode back down the front road. Hazel and Cole stood in the yard until the hoofbeats faded. "You shouldn't have come out here," Cole said. "Probably not. If they'd decided to—" "They weren't going to do anything in the yard of a man's house with the windows lit," she said. "They were delivering a message, that's all." Cole turned to look at her fully. In the evening light, his face was harder to read than usual. "You weren't scared." "I was," she said. "It just didn't seem useful to show it." He was quiet. "You handled it well," she said. "You didn't give them anything." "I don't have anything to give them." "That's exactly what I mean." She turned toward the house. "James is probably at the window." He was. She could see the shadow of him behind the curtain when she looked up. She didn't say anything about it when they went inside. James looked at his father when they came in. Cole looked back at him. "We're not withdrawing the assessment," Cole said. James absorbed this. Something in his face shifted. Very slightly, the way a locked door shifts when someone tries the right key. "Good," James said. 3 weeks into her time at the ranch, Hazel had a day that went comprehensively wrong. It started with Samuel running a fever. Not a dangerous fever. She'd seen dangerous fevers, and this wasn't one. But enough to make him miserable and clingy in a way that meant she spent most of the morning with him on her hip, which made everything else harder. The bread she'd planned to make didn't happen. The laundry she'd planned to do didn't happen. Ruth, who would have helped on another day, had a test at school she'd been preparing for, and Hazel had told her the night before that school came first. Then the pump gave out. Not the gasket this time. Something deeper in the mechanism that she couldn't identify and Cole couldn't immediately fix, which meant hauling water from the barrel they kept for the horses. which was fine for cooking and drinking but made everything else a negotiation. And then in the afternoon, a woman arrived from town who introduced herself as Agnes Dunn and said she was with the county welfare board and she was here for an informal visit. Agnes Dunn was perhaps 50 years old, sharp-eyed, with the kind of manner that was professionally pleasant and carefully observant. She looked at the house, at Hazel with Samuel on her hip, at the kitchen, at the pump that was in 3 pieces on the floor because Cole had pulled it apart to look at it. "Mr. Mercer is aware of your visit?" Hazel said. "I sent a letter last week," Agnes said. "Is he home?" "He's on the property. I'll get him." She looked at Ruth, who had come in from school and was standing in the doorway taking stock of the situation with her quiet 12-year-old efficiency. "Ruth, can you take Samuel?" Ruth took him. Samuel immediately protested the transfer and began to cry. "I'll be right back," Hazel told Agnes and went to find Cole. She found him in the barn with his head inside the water tank checking something. She said his name and he came out. "Welfare board," she said quietly. "Agnes Dunn. She's in the kitchen." Cole went still. "Don't look like that," she said. "The kitchen is clean. The pump's apart, but the house is in order. The children are home and they're fine. Just go in and talk to her like a man who has his house in order, because you do." "What about the pump?" "People fix pumps. That's not suspicious." He wiped his hands on his pants and straightened up. He took a breath. "Cole?" She waited until he looked at her. "You're not the man she would have found here 2 weeks ago. Remember that." He nodded once and went in. Hazel followed him and stood at the edge of the kitchen while he introduced himself and shook Agnes Dunn's hand and offered her coffee, which was a reasonable social gesture that the former version of Cole Mercer probably would not have thought of. Agnes accepted. The conversation was not comfortable, but it was not a disaster. Agnes asked about the children's schooling. Ruth answered for herself without being told to, with the calm self-possession that Hazel had stopped being surprised by. Agnes asked about meals and routines, and Cole answered those, haltingly but honestly. Agnes asked about Samuel's mother, and there was a moment of quiet in which Cole said Catherine had died in February and that it had been a difficult time for the family. "I imagine so," Agnes said, with something that was not quite warmth but was close to it. Agnes looked at Hazel. "And you've been here how long?" 3 weeks, Hazel said. "The children seem comfortable with you." "I hope so." Agnes looked around the kitchen, at the bread rising in the pan, the batch she'd managed to start between trips to the water barrel, at the clean dishes on the shelf, at Nell, who had appeared in the doorway and stood there with her current drawing pressed against her chest like a shield. "Is that yours?" Agnes said to Nell. Nell looked at her, then she came forward and held it out. Agnes looked at the drawing for a moment. It was the mountains again, but this time she'd added the house in the foreground, and the proportions were better than the last one. There were small figures in the yard. Hazel had spotted herself in the garden, identifiable by the spade. "You have real talent," Agnes said. Nell took the drawing back without comment, but she was almost smiling. Agnes left an hour later. She said she'd file her report by the end of the month. She said the house looked well managed. She shook Cole's hand at the door and told him the children were clearly in good care. When the sound of her buggy had faded down the road, the kitchen was very quiet. Then James, who had been in the doorway through most of this and hadn't said a word, said, "She's going to leave us alone?" "It sounds like it," Hazel said. James looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. "Good," James said again. He'd been saying that word more lately, and each time it carried a little more weight behind it. Cole fixed the pump that evening. It took him until 9 o'clock, and he was cursing at it by the end. She could hear him from the kitchen, but he got it working, and when she heard the water running again, she felt a relief that was out of proportion to a pump and was really about something else entirely. She put the kettle on. When Cole came in, filthy and tired and with a small cut on his knuckle from something the pump had done to him, she handed him a cup and didn't say anything. He sat down at the table and drank it. After a while, he said, "She's not wrong. Agnes Dunn. A month ago, this place was in bad shape." "A month ago," Hazel said. "Because of you." "Because of all of us," she said. "The children were here. Ruth was holding the house together as best she could. You were still here, even if you weren't, all the way here. That's not nothing." He turned the cup in his hands. He did that a lot, she'd noticed, a way of steadying himself. I haven't visited Catherine's grave since the funeral, he said. She didn't respond right away. Gave him time to decide if he wanted to say more. I keep meaning to, he said, and then I don't. Because if I go there, I have to... He stopped. I don't know what I have to do, just something I'm not ready for. You don't have to be ready, she said. It's not a test. He looked at her. Grief doesn't have a right way, she said. I know people act like it does, but it doesn't. There's just what you can manage on a given day and what you can't. He was quiet for a long time. The house had gone still around them, children in bed, the lamp low, the wind outside doing what the wind did. My daughter asked me last week what her mother smelled like, he said. Emma. He paused. I couldn't remember. I was standing right there, and I couldn't... His voice didn't break, but it slowed and stopped. Violets, Hazel said quietly. Ruth mentioned it once. Catherine had a soap she liked. Cole closed his eyes for a second. Violet soap, he said. Yes. He sat there with his cup and his memory, and Hazel let the silence be what it needed to be. She had not come to this ranch expecting to learn the details of a dead woman's life. She had not come expecting to piece together Catherine Mercer from the edges of her children and the hollow her absence had left in her husband. But that was what she was doing, night by night, and she found she didn't mind it. It felt like something that needed doing, and she'd always been better at doing than at standing back. She washed out the cups when Cole finally went upstairs. She turned off the lamp. She stood for a moment in the dark kitchen and listened to the house breathe around her. 3 weeks. It felt like more. She went upstairs to bed, stepping over the third stair that creaked, which she'd learned to do automatically by the end of the first week, and she didn't wake anyone. And in the morning she'd be up at 5:30 again, and there would be more to do. She found, settling onto her pillow in the dark, that she didn't mind that either. The letter arrived on a Thursday, 6 weeks after Hazel had first walked through the Mercer front door. Cole brought it in from town with the other mail and set it on the table without comment, but she saw the way he held it, careful, like it might bite. And she saw the return address printed in neat, controlled handwriting. Eleanor Voss, 14 Carver Street, Denver, Colorado. He opened it standing at the table, read it once, set it down. Catherine's sister, he said. She's coming. Hazel waited. Next week, he said. She wrote this 4 days ago, so possibly Saturday. What does she want? Cole picked the letter back up and read a piece of it aloud. His voice was flat in the way it got when he was managing something. I have been patient, Cole, but patience is not the same as indifference. I have not seen my sister's children since the funeral, and I intend to remedy that. I will arrive on the 15th or thereabouts. I expect the children will be available to receive me. He put the letter down again. She expects, Hazel said. That's Eleanor. What's her situation with the children? Does she have some kind of claim? Cole turned the letter over in his hands, which had become his way of handling things he was uncertain about. She doesn't, not legally, but she's Catherine's family, and she loved Catherine, and He stopped. She wrote to me in March, said she was worried about the children, said if I couldn't manage, I should consider letting her take some of them to Denver. Some of them, Hazel said. Ruth and the younger girls, she meant. She doesn't... Eleanor and James have never gotten along. Hazel looked at him steadily. And what did you say in March? I didn't answer. She absorbed this. He had the decency to look like he knew it was a problem. She's going to come here expecting the worst, Hazel said. Probably. Then we make sure the worst isn't what she finds. Cole looked at her. You keep saying things like that as if it's simple. I know it's not simple, she said. I'm saying it anyway. She told Ruth that evening, privately, while they were finishing the kitchen. She'd learned early on that Ruth managed new information better when she had time with it before it happened, unlike Emma, who managed better when things were simply presented as settled fact. Ruth's expression didn't change much. She kept drying the same dish for a few extra seconds. Is she coming to take us to Denver? She's coming to see you. That's not what I asked. Hazel looked at her. She doesn't have the authority to take you anywhere. Your father does, and your father isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. Ruth set the dish down. She wrote to us, after Mama died, said she wanted us to come to Denver for the summer. Papa never answered her letter. I know. He doesn't like her much. He doesn't know her very well, Hazel said carefully. People who marry into a family sometimes don't. Ruth thought about this. She was nice to us when we were little. Before Mama got... She stopped. Before things got harder. She picked up another dish. She sent Emma a doll for her birthday in June. Emma doesn't know who it was from because Papa didn't say. Hazel filed that away for later. Will you tell Nell and Emma? Hazel asked. Emma will panic, Ruth said. I know. That's why I want you to tell her. She trusts how you tell things. Ruth considered this with the seriousness she gave most things. All right, she said. Hazel heard Emma's reaction from downstairs 40 minutes later. A burst of protest, high and sharp, and then Ruth's voice, lower, steady, and then quiet. She didn't go up. Ruth had it. But Eleanor Voss arrived on Saturday, as predicted, at 2 in the afternoon. She was not what Hazel had assembled in her imagination, which was a harder, colder version of the controlling sister type. Eleanor was perhaps 38, slim, dressed in city clothes that were good quality and not showy, with Catherine's same dark eyes. Hazel recognized them from the photograph on the mantel. Set in a face that was tired in a specific way, the way of someone who'd been carrying grief like a job. She came through the gate and took in the yard, the house, the porch. Her expression was neutral in the way of someone holding a great deal back. Cole met her on the porch. They shook hands, which told Hazel something about the quality of the relationship. People who were warm with each other did not shake hands. Eleanor, Cole said. Cole. She looked at the house. You've done some work. Some, he said. She came inside. Hazel was in the kitchen, which was where she'd decided to be. Present, but not positioned at the door like she was managing an arrival. Eleanor found her naturally when she came through the hall. They looked at each other. You're the housekeeper, Eleanor said. Hazel Carter, Hazel said. Yes. Eleanor's eyes moved around the kitchen with the efficiency of someone assessing. The clean surfaces, the bread on the shelf, the order that had taken 3 weeks to build and still felt, some days, like something Hazel was holding in place with both hands. Where are the children? Eleanor said. Ruth and James are outside. Nell's in the front room. Emma's upstairs and will come down when she's ready. Eleanor looked at her. Will she? She's nervous, Hazel said. About the visit. Give her a few minutes. Something in Eleanor's expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but adjusted. Like she'd expected a different answer and this one required recalibration. Cole showed her to the front room and Hazel stayed in the kitchen and listened through the wall to the sound of Eleanor meeting Nell. And the way Nell's voice was quiet, and then, gradually, slightly less quiet, and the way Eleanor said, that's remarkable, really about something Hazel was certain was a drawing. She put the kettle on. Ruth came in through the back door 20 minutes later with the specific look of someone who'd been stealing herself. She's here, Ruth said. I know, she's in the front room with Nell. Ruth stood at the window and looked toward the yard where James was visible doing something with one of the fence horses. James isn't going to come in. I know that too. He doesn't... Ruth stopped. He thinks she's going to try to split us up. Is that what he thinks? Or is that what he told you? Ruth almost smiled. Almost. Both. I'll talk to him, Hazel said. She went out through the back. James was at the rail fence doing something with the top board that didn't strictly need doing but gave him a reason to be outside. She stood beside him for a moment without speaking. She seems fine, she said. She wants to take the girls to Denver. She wanted that in March, Hazel said. A lot has changed since March. James hit the board with his hand to test it. The board didn't give. She thinks Papa can't manage. She thought that in March, Hazel said again. She hasn't been here. She doesn't know what's changed. She paused. But you could show her. James looked at her sideways. What do you mean? She's going to be here until tomorrow or the day after. She's going to be looking at everything, the way the house runs, the way the children are, the way your father is. Hazel shrugged. You're part of what she sees. The James she's expecting is the James from March. You could let her see someone different. He was quiet for a moment. Why would I care what she thinks? Because she loved your mother, Hazel said. And she's scared for the same reason you were scared. She just doesn't know yet that the reason went away. James looked at the fence board. His jaw worked. Then he picked up the tool he'd set down and turned toward the barn door. I'll come in for supper, he said. She counted that as a win. Emma came downstairs an hour after Eleanor arrived. She came in small steps, stopping at the bottom of the staircase and peering into the front room from the doorway. Eleanor was on the settee with Nell's drawings spread across her knees. Nell had opened the box from the closet, Hazel realized, and a tightening in her chest loosened at the knowledge of it. Eleanor looked up when Emma appeared. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Eleanor said, "Emma, you've gotten tall." Emma stared at her. "I sent you a doll for your birthday," Eleanor said. "A blue one, with yellow hair. Did you get it?" Something shifted in Emma's face. "That was you? That was me?" Emma processed this. Then she crossed the room and sat down on the far end of the settee. Not close, but not as far as she could have gone. "Papa didn't say who it was from," she said. Eleanor glanced toward the door, which Cole had gone through a while ago, and her expression said several things without saying any of them out loud. "He probably forgot," she said, which was more generous than the look had been. Hazel, passing through the doorway with a tray of coffee, caught Eleanor's eye for just a second. Eleanor looked at her. Hazel didn't say anything. Neither did Eleanor. But something passed between them, the way things pass between women who are both trying to manage the same set of problems from different angles, and who are beginning to understand that they are not, in fact, on opposite sides. The harder conversation happened that evening, after supper. James had come in. He'd sat at the table and he'd been quieter than usual, which on James read as controlled rather than sullen. A different thing entirely. He'd answered Eleanor's questions about the ranch and the fence work with the clipped practicality of someone who wasn't going to be warm, but wasn't going to be rude either. Eleanor had asked about his plans, and he'd said he intended to help his father run the Mercer Ranch, and he'd said it flat and clear like a statement of territory. Eleanor had not pushed. After the children went up, Cole and Eleanor sat in the front room and Hazel stayed in the kitchen because it wasn't her conversation. She could hear voices, low, not arguing, but with the particular cadence of people talking around the thing they actually needed to say. Then Eleanor's voice went up slightly, and Hazel heard, 7 months, Cole. 7 months and I had no word, and Cole quieter. I know. I lost her too. She was my sister. I know, Eleanor. You didn't answer my letters, either of them. A pause. No. Why? A longer pause. Hazel could hear the clock on the mantel, could hear the wind outside. Because answering meant dealing with it, Cole said. And I was having a hard time dealing with anything. Silence. The children, Eleanor said. Her voice had changed. Some of the sharpness had gone out of it and left something raw underneath. Are they all right? Truly? Better than they were, Cole said. Hazel came 6 weeks ago, and it's been better. I've been better. I should have been better a long time ago. You should have written me, Eleanor said. Not angry now, just tired and honest. I could have helped. I know, Cole said. I'm sorry. Hazel heard the clock tick, heard Eleanor exhale. She looks like Catherine, Eleanor said. Emma, more than before. I know. Cole's voice was rough at the edges. She's got Catherine's way of just deciding things, just picking something and doing it with no particular doubt. A brief surprise sound from Eleanor, almost a laugh. Yes, Catherine was exactly like that. The conversation went quieter after that, moved into the register of people who are no longer fighting and are just tired together, and Hazel stopped listening and washed the last of the dishes and went to bed. The next morning she found Eleanor in the kitchen before the children were up. Eleanor was standing at the window with a cup of coffee she'd made herself, looking out at the yard in the early light. She turned when Hazel came in. You're up early? Hazel said. I always am. Eleanor watched her start the stove. How long have you actually been here? 6 weeks. And before that? Cole said you came from Santa Fe. Originally from Ohio, Hazel said. My parents died last winter. I needed work. Eleanor was quiet, turning her cup. You didn't sign on for this. No, Hazel said. I signed on for an orderly household and well-managed children. She glanced at Eleanor. I imagine you know how accurate that description was. Eleanor's mouth curved. Not a full smile, but close. Cole always was better at hoping than accounting for reality. He's getting better at it. Eleanor looked at her. The assessment was direct and unself-conscious. The look of a woman who was accustomed to deciding what she thought about people and doing it efficiently. You care about them, she said. That's clear. They're easy to care about when you know them, Hazel said. And Cole? Hazel kept her eyes on the stove. He's a better man than he's been presenting. He just lost track of it for a while. Eleanor set her cup down. I came here expecting to find, I don't know what I expected, something I'd have to fight about. She looked out the window again. Nell showed me her drawings last night. She told me you were the one who told her to keep going, that her drawings were worth something. They are. Catherine drew too, Eleanor said. Badly, honestly. She was better at other things, but she tried. A pause. Nell has her tenacity. Hazel put the bread on and turned to look at Eleanor fully for the first time that morning. Are you going to try to take the children to Denver? Eleanor looked back at her. The question was direct, and they both knew it, and neither of them flinched from it. I was going to, Eleanor said. I came here prepared to. She picked up her cup again. But that was before I saw the kitchen and the beds and the bread and Nell's drawings out of the closet and Emma coming downstairs on her own and James at the supper table. She paused. That was before I understood what you've been doing here. It's not just me, Hazel said. Cole. I know. I talked to him. Eleanor's voice was quiet. I was angry at him for a long time, for not being enough, for not managing, for not answering my letters. She set the cup down a second time. But grief is... I know what grief does. I watched it do it to me, and I was still angry at him for it, which isn't very rational. It's very human, Hazel said. Eleanor looked at her. Then she nodded slowly, like she was settling something in herself. I'd like to come back at Christmas, she said. If Cole would allow it. Talk to him, Hazel said. But I think he will. Eleanor went to Denver 2 days later. She hugged Nell and Emma and Ruth on the porch. She shook James's hand and he let her, which was not nothing. She held Samuel for 10 minutes and didn't want to give him back. And Hazel watched Cole watch his sister-in-law hold his youngest child and thought she saw something in his face work its way toward being all right. At the last minute, Emma ran after Eleanor's buggy 20 feet down the road shouting, You can come for Christmas! Hazel said! Eleanor pulled the horse up and looked back at Hazel on the porch. Hazel raised a hand. Eleanor raised hers back. The water case moved through October like all legal things moved, slowly, with paper and counterpaper, and the particular frustration of watching something clearly wrong stay in place, because the mechanism for correcting it had its own schedule. Henderson's lawyer in Santa Fe sent word that the county land court had agreed to hear the assessment. The hearing was set for the 3rd week of November. In the meantime, Briggs' diversion ditch continued operating, and the creek through the Mercer property continued running low. Cole went to 2 more rancher meetings. He came back from the second one and told Hazel that Paulson had finally pulled out of his side negotiation with Brigg, having realized, apparently, that Briggs' idea of a shared agreement was an agreement Brigg controlled and everyone else accepted. That's 5 of us formally, Cole said, against 1. 1 with money and a lawyer, Hazel said. Hendrick's lawyer is good. Then trust him. Cole sat down at the table. He was getting better at sitting at the table, at being in the house in a way that was present rather than merely occupying space. She'd noticed it accumulating over the weeks, the way you notice a plant growing, not in the moment, but between moments. Brigg made another offer, he said, through the lawyer, $50 and a guaranteed water allotment in exchange for withdrawing from the court case. No, Hazel said. I wasn't going to accept. Good. He'll escalate, Cole said. After we say no, he'll escalate. She knew he was right. She'd been thinking the same thing since the 2 men in the yard 3 weeks back. Brigg was the kind of man who read no as an obstacle rather than an answer, and obstacles were things he was accustomed to removing. Then we make sure when he escalates there's nothing here to find, she said. The house is in order. The children are in school. The assessment is filed. We've got nothing to hide. Cole looked at her. He doesn't need something to find. He just needs to make things hard enough that people give up. Then we don't give up, Hazel said. That's the whole answer. He was quiet for a moment. You make it sound simple again. It's not simple, she said, but it is straightforward. Those are different things. He turned his cup in his hands. Outside, she could hear James and Ruth on the porch. Some low conversation, a brief laugh from Ruth, the particular sound of siblings who were beginning to remember that they could exist with each other rather than just alongside. I want to take the children to the cemetery, Cole said. Before it gets too cold. I want to... He stopped, started again. I want to take them to see Catherine. Hazel was quiet. I've been avoiding it, he said. I know that, but Eleanor said something before she left. She said Catherine would want the children to know where she was, to be able to have a place to go when they needed it. He paused. She was right. When do you want to go? Sunday, he said, if the weather holds. I'll have a warm breakfast ready before you leave, she said. He looked at her. Will you come? She thought about it, about whether it was her place, about the difference between being part of this family and being employed by it, which was a line she was aware of even when it wasn't clear exactly where it fell. If you want me there, she said. I do, he said, simply, without qualification. She nodded. The Sunday was cold and clear, the sky the hard blue of late October in New Mexico. They went as a family, all 6 children and Cole and Hazel, walking the 1.5 miles to the small cemetery at the edge of town. Cole carried Samuel. Emma held Hazel's hand the whole way. The grave had a stone that was plain and well cut. Catherine Ann Mercer, 1852 to 1887, beloved. Someone had placed dried flowers there recently. Eleanor, Hazel guessed. They stood in a loose cluster around the grave and nobody said anything for a while. James stood apart, slightly, with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the stone with the expression of someone who had been holding something for a long time and was figuring out whether this was the place to put it down. Cole stood at the foot of the grave with Samuel in his arms and talked to his children about their mother. Not a speech, nothing organized. Just things. That she burned toast but wouldn't admit it. That she could name every kind of bird in the territory. That she argued with the hardware merchant every single time she went to town and considered it a personal failure if she paid full price. That she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, which made her jokes funnier even when they weren't. Ruth laughed at that, sudden and brief, and covered her mouth. Emma said, I know. I remember that. Cole looked at his youngest daughter for a moment. She'd have been so proud of you, he said. All of you, even when you're being difficult. A pause. Especially when you're being difficult. She was proud of difficult. James made a sound that might have been a laugh and might have been something else. They stayed for 20 minutes. Emma put a small stone she'd picked up on the walk on top of the grave marker, which was a thing children do, and nobody told her not to. On the walk back, Cole walked beside Hazel for a while in a quiet that didn't need filling. After a time, he said, Thank you. She didn't say for what. She understood what he meant. You're welcome, she said. Emma ran ahead and then ran back to take Hazel's hand, and they walked the rest of the way home like that. Cole on one side, Emma on the other, the children spread out along the road in the cold autumn light, and the ranch waiting at the end of it, smoke already rising from the chimney because Ruth had gone ahead to tend the stove. Hazel looked at the house coming into view, that tired, improving, stubborn house, and felt something she hadn't felt in almost a year settle in quietly and without announcement. Like putting down something heavy you'd gotten used to carrying, like arriving somewhere you hadn't known you were going. The 3rd week of November arrived cold and sharp, the way New Mexico mornings do when the season has finally committed to itself. Frost on the window panes, ice in the water trough, breath visible in the air when you stepped outside before the sun cleared the ridgeline. The land court hearing was set for Wednesday. Cole left before dawn with Hendricks and the Santa Fe lawyer, a compact and serious man named Garfield Pruitt, who wore a good coat and spoke in the measured, unhurried way of someone who had learned that certainty is more persuasive than volume. Hazel had met him once, briefly, when he'd come to the ranch to review Cole's original survey documents, and she'd decided she trusted him the way you trust a good tool, not warmly, but completely. She watched the wagon go down the road in the gray pre-dawn light, and then went back inside and started breakfast. The children knew about the hearing. She hadn't hidden it from them because they weren't small enough to be protected from it, and hiding things from children who already knew something was happening only taught them that the truth was something adults kept from you. Ruth knew the most because Ruth was 12 and had been running adult calculations in her head for 7 months. James knew because he'd made it his business to know. He'd sat in on one of Cole's conversations with Pruitt without being invited, and Cole had let him stay, which Hazel thought was the right call. Even Nell, in her quiet way, had asked specific questions over the past weeks. What happens if the court says no? Can Brig take the water forever? If we lose the ranch, where do we go? Hazel had answered each question as honestly as she could, which meant saying she didn't know for the things she didn't know, which children can accept far better than adults assume. Emma, for her part, had decided the situation was resolved already. "We'll win," she told Hazel at breakfast 3 days prior, with the flat certainty of a 7-year-old who hadn't yet accumulated enough losses to be cautious about hope. "Papa went to all those meetings. We'll win." Hazel had said, "We'll see," because she was 31 and had accumulated enough losses to be cautious. But she'd thought about Emma's certainty all the same. The day was long in the particular way of waiting days, where each hour presents itself with more weight than it deserves. She kept the children busy. There was always enough to keep children busy on a working ranch in November. Wood to carry, animals to feed, the garden beds to bank against the coming hard freeze. James worked without being asked, which was either a sign of his anxiety or his determination, and probably both. Ruth made soup, real soup, not the beans and salt pork of those first weeks, but a proper thing with the last of the garden carrots and a ham bone Cole had brought from town. Nell drew at the kitchen table while Samuel slept in his cradle beside the stove, and Hazel noticed the drawing was not mountains this time, but the kitchen itself. The table and the lamp and the window and the shapes of people moving in it, small and careful and true. Emma asked 6 times what time it was. At 4 in the afternoon, Hazel heard the wagon. She didn't run to the window. She finished what she was doing at the stove, set the spoon down, and walked to the front room. The children had already heard it, and they were all in the front room, Ruth with her arms crossed, James in the doorway, Nell with her pencil still in her hand, Emma pressing her face against the window glass. The wagon came through the gate. Cole was on the seat beside Hendricks. She couldn't read his face from the distance. Then the wagon got closer, and she could. And his face was tired in a particular way. The tired of someone who'd been holding tension for a long time and had just been permitted to put it down. Emma was out the door before anyone could say anything. She heard Emma's voice, high and carrying, "Did we win? Papa, did we win?" And Cole's voice. And she didn't hear the words, but she heard the shape of them. And then Emma made a sound that was half shout and half something else, and Hazel let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. James turned from the doorway and looked at her. His face was doing several things at once. "We won," he said, like he needed to say it out loud to make it real. "Sounds like," Hazel said. He turned back to the door and went out at a pace that was almost but not quite a run. "Boss." Cole came in that evening with the details. The land court had reviewed Pruitt's evidence, the original survey markers, the water flow measurements Hendricks had documented over 6 months, the county recorder's assessment, and the testimony of all 5 ranch families. Briggs' attorney had argued prior use and regional water management necessity, which Pruitt had taken apart methodically and without drama. The court had found that Briggs' diversion ditch had been constructed without legal basis and ordered it filled within 30 days. The original water rights of the 5 ranches were formally recorded and protected. Briggs could appeal. Pruitt had said so directly, without softening it. A man with Briggs' resources could tie the thing in court for another year if he chose to, but he didn't choose to. Word came back through Hendricks 2 days later that Briggs had told his attorney to let it go, that he'd moved his attention to a land dispute in the north of the county, that the Mercer situation was no longer worth his time and money when there were easier things to pursue. Cole told Hazel this in the kitchen on a Friday morning, matter-of-factly, like a man reading weather. "It's done," he said, Briggs walking away. Good, she said. Just good? What else should it be? He looked at her for a moment. Then something in his face shifted in that way it had been shifting lately. Incremental, quiet, like ice going out in a river. Not dramatic, just ongoing. I keep waiting for you to say I told you so, he said. I never said you'd win, she said. I said not to give up. Those are different things. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. She turned back to the bread she was working. Tell the children tonight, properly. Sit them all down and tell them it's finished and they don't have to worry about the ranch anymore. They worried about the ranch? She looked at him over her shoulder. Cole, they've been terrified since October. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know that. I know you didn't. He thought about this with the expression of a man cataloging the things he still needed to learn about his own household. It was not a defeated expression. It was, she thought, the expression of someone who had accepted that learning was ongoing and had stopped being ashamed of what he didn't yet know. Tonight, he said. Tonight, she agreed. He did it right. She gave him that. He gathered them after supper, all five, Samuel on his knee, making his new sound that was almost but not quite a word. And he told them plainly and completely that the water dispute was resolved, that the ranch was secure, that no one was going to threaten them again, and that it was over. He told them they'd done it as a family, which was not entirely accurate in the legal sense, but was entirely accurate in every sense that mattered. He told James specifically that his help on the fence and at the meetings and with the daily work of the ranch had made a difference. And James looked at the table and then at his father and said nothing, but the look was enough. He told Nell that Eleanor had asked about her drawings in a letter she'd sent that week, and that he'd written back and said she could visit at Christmas. And Nell's face did the thing it did when she was pleased but wasn't ready to show it fully, that contained sideways almost smile that Hazel had learned to read. He told Emma she'd been right, that they'd won. Emma said, I know, with the breezy certainty of someone for whom this had never been seriously in doubt, and even Ruth laughed. Hazel sat at the corner of the table and listened to this family talk, and she did not say much herself because it wasn't her moment. It was theirs, and she understood the difference between belonging to a moment and needing to be at the center of it. Though she noticed that Emma had, at some point in the past few weeks, developed the habit of sitting in the chair closest to wherever Hazel was sitting. She noticed it now and didn't say anything about it. But she noticed. December came in hard, the way it does in high desert country, and the ranch contracted inward the way ranches do. Shorter days, more work inside, the particular enforced closeness of a household that has to share its warmth. It was in this closeness that things between Cole and Hazel changed, in the way they'd been slowly, quietly changing for weeks, in the way that most true things change, not with a decisive moment, but with the accumulation of small ones. He'd started without discussion, telling her things, not report-style things about the ranch. Those had always happened. Personal things. A memory of his father. A story about the first winter he'd built the ranch, when the roof had collapsed under snow and he and Catherine had slept in the barn for a week. He told her these things the way people tell things to someone they've stopped being careful around. She told him things back. About Ohio, about her parents, her mother who could do long division in her head and did it to entertain herself during sermons, her father who grew tomatoes with a seriousness he gave to nothing else. She told him about the months after the funerals, the strange emptiness of a house where you knew every floorboard and every draft and every sound, and how she'd left because staying had become a form of disappearing. And now, he said, they were at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in early December, the children in bed, the stove doing what it could against the cold. And now what? Do you still feel like you're disappearing? She looked at her hands, thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. No, she said. Here, I feel like the opposite. He was quiet for a moment, then, what would you call the opposite? She looked up at him. He wasn't asking casually. She could see that. He was asking the way he'd learned to ask things, directly and with his whole attention, which was something he'd gotten better at without particularly announcing it. I don't know yet, she said honestly. I'm still figuring out what word fits it. He nodded. He looked at the table. He looked back at her. And then he said, with the slightly unpolished delivery of someone who'd rehearsed something and then decided to abandon the rehearsal entirely, "I'd like you to stay, not as a housekeeper." The kitchen was very quiet. "Cole, I'm not asking you to decide anything tonight," he said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. I know this is strange. I know it's only been 3 months, and I know what it looks like. You came here for a job, and I lied to you in the letter, and you've done more for this family than—" He stopped and tried again. "What I'm saying is I don't think of you as someone who works here anymore. I'm not sure I have for a while. And I thought you should know that." Hazel looked at him. He was not a polished man. He was not someone who said things beautifully or arranged them well. He had a dead wife, he was still learning to grieve, and 5 children who were still learning to be children again, and a ranch that was always 2 bad seasons from precarious. He sat by creeks in the afternoons when things got hard. He didn't answer letters. But he'd gone to the meeting. He'd sat his children down and told them the truth. He'd taken them to the cemetery in the cold and talked about their mother like she was a real person and not just an absence to be managed. He'd put his hat back on his head and started trying, and trying had not come easily to him, and he'd done it anyway. "I know what you mean," she said. And I don't think of myself as someone who only works here either," she said. "I haven't for a while." He looked at her. She looked back. "That's not a yes to anything," she said. "I know. I'm not going to pretend the circumstances aren't complicated." "They are," he agreed. "And the children are going to have opinions," he said. "Ruth will be cautious. James will take a while. Emma will probably have told the whole town by Thursday." Despite herself, she almost laughed. "I'm not asking for an answer," he said again. "I just wanted to say the thing out loud, so you knew where I stood." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "All right, I know where you stand." "All right," he said. They sat there in the quiet of the kitchen for a while longer, not filling the silence, and Hazel thought that this was one of the things she'd come to value most in this place, that the silence here didn't press on her, that she could sit in a room with someone and not feel the need to manage the space between them. She'd forgotten, somewhere in the year of grief and displacement and moving, what it felt like to be somewhere that didn't require managing. She hadn't known she'd forgotten until she remembered. Eleanor came for Christmas. She arrived on the 22nd with gifts and a carpet bag, and the particular energy of a woman who'd been looking forward to something for a long time and was allowing herself to show it. Emma ran to meet her buggy 20 feet before it stopped, which seemed to have become Emma's standard greeting for arrivals she approved of. Eleanor brought Nell a proper sketchbook and a set of drawing pencils that were far better than anything available in Cimarron, and Nell held them with the reverence that a person reserves for objects they have wanted without knowing they were allowed to want them. She brought James a book about land surveying, which was either an insight or a coincidence, and was received with the particular stunned gratitude of a boy who'd never thought an adult was paying close enough attention to know what he actually cared about. She brought Ruth 3 novels and told her they were not improving literature, just stories, and that she was allowed to read them simply because she wanted to. Ruth held them against her chest the way Nell held her drawings. Eleanor and Cole were careful with each other that first evening in a way that was not unfriendly but was honest. 2 people acknowledging that they'd gotten off to a poor start and were choosing to try something different. They talked about Catherine on Christmas Eve, sitting at the table after the children had gone to bed. And Hazel was there. And it was hard in the way that true things are hard, and also necessary in the way that true things are necessary. Eleanor said at some point, "She would have liked you," looking at Hazel. Hazel said, "I think I would have liked her." Eleanor said, "She was infuriating. She was absolutely certain she was right about everything, and she was right about everything about 60% of the time, which made the other 40% very difficult to live through." Cole made a sound that was entirely a laugh, sudden and real, and for a second his whole face changed, opened up into something younger and less worn, and Eleanor looked at him, and something in her eyes went soft. "There you are," Eleanor said, not unkindly. Cole looked at his sister-in-law. I know I've been." "You've been grieving," Eleanor said, "and so have I. And we were both so busy doing it that we forgot we were doing it at each other." She paused. "I'd like to stop that." "So would I," Cole said. They shook hands, which was their version of warmth, and Hazel thought that was all right. Not every reconciliation looked like an embrace. Some of them looked like two tired people choosing to stop making things harder than they needed to be, and that was its own kind of progress. In January, after Eleanor had gone back to Denver and the holiday had settled into memory, Cole asked Hazel to marry him. He did it in the kitchen, which was where most things happened in that house. On a Sunday afternoon when the children were occupied elsewhere and the ranch was quiet under its winter coat of cold. He didn't make a production of it. He sat down across from her and said, "I'd like to ask you something, and I want you to know I've been thinking about it for a while, not just since December." She set down what she was holding. "Will you marry me?" he said. I know I'm not an easy thing to take on. I know the children are..." "Cole," she said. He stopped. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes. Yes." He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't let me finish." "You were going to keep listing reasons to say no," she said. "I've heard them. I've thought about them. The answer is still yes." He looked at her for a long time, then, "All right." "All right," she agreed. It was not a romantic declaration. It was not the stuff of novels. It was two people who had seen each other in difficult circumstances and inconvenient moments and had decided, carefully and without illusion, that they wanted to keep seeing each other. That the accumulation of ordinary moments, bread and pump repairs and difficult children and legal hearings and late kitchen conversations had built something they both recognized as worth protecting. The children found out in the various ways that children find things out. Ruth asked directly, because Ruth always did. Nell found out when Emma told her, loudly, in the hallway. James was told by Cole, man to man, sitting on the south fence they'd repaired together in the fall, and whatever was said between them in that conversation was their business. But James came back inside and said to Hazel, "You're good for him," in the tone of someone delivering a verdict, and she accepted it as what it was. Emma told 3 people in town within 48 hours, which was exactly what Cole had predicted. They married in March, when the ground was beginning to soften, and the first signs of something living were appearing in the garden beds Hazel had turned in November against the spring. It was a small thing. The county judge, Eleanor, who came back from Denver for it without being asked, Hendricks and his wife, the school teacher, Miss Aldred, who had developed a fondness for the Mercer children that had survived even Emma's incident in September. Ruth stood very straight and did not cry, which meant she was crying on the inside, which anyone who knew her understood. James stood beside his father with his hands in his pockets and his jaw set and something in his eyes that was not quite peace but was working toward it. Nell held Samuel, who had recently learned to clap, and did so at random intervals throughout the proceedings. Emma held Hazel's hand until the moment Hazel needed to use it, and then held it again after. It was not a perfect day. The wind came up in the afternoon and blew a neighbor's fence post into the road. Samuel cried through most of the reception. Emma spilled her lemonade on Eleanor's good dress, and Eleanor said it was fine in a voice that indicated she was deciding it was fine, which was its own kind of grace. But it was real, and it was theirs. Here is what Hazel Carter had learned in the year that changed her life. Stated not as wisdom she'd always carried, but as things she'd had to work out the hard way. In a broken ranch house in New Mexico territory, with a baby on her hip and bread on the stove and a family that didn't know yet that it needed her. That showing up is not a small thing. Most people underestimate it. They think showing up is the minimum, the floor, the thing you do before the real work begins. But she'd come to understand that for a family who'd been abandoned by death, by grief, by 3 housekeepers who'd decided it was too much, showing up and staying was itself the work. Everything else was built on it. The children are not fragile. They are, in fact, remarkably durable, which is both reassuring and sobering, because it means they can survive a great deal, and also that they will carry what they survive. Ruth would always be a little more serious than she should have been at 12. James would always check exits first when he entered rooms. Emma would always grip a little harder when she held your hand. But they had survived, and they were here, and surviving is where everything else starts. That grief is not something you get through. It is something you learn to carry differently. Cole had not stopped loving Catherine. He would not stop. The love and the loss were the same thing, and asking someone to give up the loss was asking them to give up the love, which no one who'd loved someone could do. Hazel had not replaced Catherine. She had not tried to. She had simply arrived in the space that grief had left hollowed out and filled it with something different. Not better or worse, just different and real and hers, that a person can have more than one home in a life. She'd thought, somewhere in the fog of last winter's grief, that her home was gone. The Ohio farmhouse, her mother's kitchen, her father's tomato garden, and that what she was doing in heading west was looking for somewhere to put herself until she figured out what came next. She had not been looking for belonging. She hadn't believed belonging was something she could walk toward. She thought it was the kind of thing that either existed or it didn't, that you were either from a place or you weren't, that family was something you were born into or you weren't. She'd been wrong about that. She'd been completely, usefully, relievedly wrong. The Mercer Ranch in the spring of 1888 was not a transformed place in the way that stories like to suggest transformations happen. Sudden, total, unmistakable. It was still a working ranch with problems and repairs and seasons that were better or worse. The pump broke again in April. The east fence needed replacing. James was 15 now and had opinions about everything, which was appropriate for 15 and exhausting for everyone around it. But the house had smoke in the chimney and bread on the shelf, and children who went to school in the mornings and came home in the afternoons to find someone there. It had a man who sat at his own table in the evenings and talked to his children about real things. It had a woman who had arrived with $32 and a letter full of lies, and had stayed because a small girl in bare feet had taken her hand and held on. Emma still held on. She probably always would. That was Emma. Some evenings, when the work was done and the younger children were in bed and the house had gone to that particular stillness that only houses full of sleeping people have, Hazel would sit at the kitchen table and hear the quiet and think about the woman who'd stepped off the stage in Cimarron a year ago. Tight-jawed, careful, out of money and out of next steps, determined not to need anything she wasn't certain she could get. She didn't recognize that woman exactly anymore. Not because she'd become someone different, but because that woman had been so focused on not needing that she'd forgotten needing was how you found things. She'd needed work and found a family. She'd needed a room and found a home. She'd needed, and this was the part she understood last, turning it over in the quiet of late evenings. She'd needed to matter to someone, the way we all do, in the specific and irreplaceable way that means your absence would leave a shape. She hadn't known she needed that until she'd found it, by accident, in a house that smelled like grief and old beans, because a barefoot 6-year-old had run across a yard and taken her hand. The woman who had arrived with nothing much had built, or helped build, or been built into, something she hadn't known to look for. That was the thing about the life she'd stumbled into here. It hadn't been what she came for. It had been better than what she came for, which is not something you can plan for, only something you can allow. She allowed it. And that, in the end, was enough.